The television flickered in the dim living room of apartment 3B, casting blue shadows across Lily Morgan's small face as she pressed her nose against the cold window glass. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled on every house along Maple Street except hers. The 5-year-old's breath fogged the pain in small circles that faded and returned with each exhale, a rhythm as steady as her disappointment. Behind her, the apartment stood dark and bare, no tree in the corner, no stockings hung anywhere. Just the hum of an ancient refrigerator and the muted sounds of a holiday special she'd seen 3 times already this week. Her fingers traced patterns in the condensation, while her other hand clutched Mr. Whiskers, the stuffed cat whose orange fur had faded to something closer to rust. The toy was the last gift her father had given her before he walked out 2 years ago, though Lily had no memory of him beyond the vague sense that someone used to be there and then wasn't. Now it was just her and Mommy was at work again, wouldn't be home until the numbers on the microwave said 11, and Lily was supposed to be asleep hours before that. Mrs. Chen from next door had checked on her at 7, brought a sandwich, and reminded Lily to lock the door, not to open it for strangers to call if she needed anything. The elderly woman's hands had trembled slightly as she'd smoothed Lily's hair, and Lily had seen something sad in her eyes that made her stomach feel funny. Mrs. Chen's apartment didn't have Christmas lights either. The commercial break filled the screen with images of children squealing as they tore through wrapping paper, parents laughing in matching pajamas, a golden retriever wearing reindeer antlers. Lily's throat felt tight. She'd been good this year. She'd cleaned her room without being asked. She'd shared her crayons with Emma at school even after Emma broke the red one. She'd eaten all her vegetables, even the mushy green beans from the food bank that tasted like wet paper. Being good was supposed to matter. The Christmas special returned, showing Santa's workshop bustling with elves, and Lily remembered the phone number she'd seen yesterday. Mommy had rushed her past the Iron Horse bar on their way to the grocery store, walking faster like she always did when they passed that building, with the motorcycles parked outside. But Lily had noticed the red numbers painted on the wall, big and bright, and something about them had stuck in her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming. Standing on her tiptoes in the kitchen, Lily could just reach the old phone hanging on the wall. The buttons were sticky, and one of them stuck when she pressed it, but she carefully dialed the number she'd memorized. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a machine clicked on a man's voice, rough and brief, telling her to leave a message. The beep sounded like permission. Lily's voice came out smaller than she'd intended, barely louder than a whisper. Santa didn't come. No presents for me. She hung up quickly, suddenly scared of what she'd done, and scrambled back to the couch where Mr. Whiskers waited. Outside, the Patterson family across the street emerged from their house in winter coats, the grandmother holding a little boy's hand, everyone laughing about something. Lily watched them pile into a car that started on the first try and drive away toward the warm glow of downtown. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and tried very hard not to cry because Mommy said crying didn't fix things and Lily needed to be brave. The apartment felt colder than before. A draft snuck under the front door, making the cheap curtains flutter. Lily pulled the throw blanket from the couch arm and wrapped it around her shoulders. But it didn't help the cold that seemed to come from somewhere inside her chest. The kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with being 5 years old and alone, and wondering if maybe Santa had forgotten her address, or worse, if Santa had decided she wasn't worth remembering at all. Sarah Morgan had been 23 when she married David Morgan in a courthouse ceremony that cost $47 and felt like the beginning of something hopeful. He'd been charming in that careless way some men are promising her the world, while delivering nothing but excuses and empty bottles. She'd worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat while he cycled through positions at gas stations and warehouses, always getting fired for showing up late or not showing up at all. When Lily was born in March of 2019, Sarah had believed motherhood would change him, that their daughter would be the anchor he needed to stop drifting. She'd been catastrophically wrong. One morning in August of 2020, Sarah woke to find David's side of the bed empty and cold, his clothes gone from the closet, his wallet and keys vanished from the counter. The note he'd left contained 8 words that would replay in her mind for years. I can't do this. I'm sorry. Sarah, no explanation, no forwarding address, no child support, just absence where presence should have been, and a 14-month-old daughter who would grow up asking questions Sarah couldn't answer. The years that followed had been a grinding exercise in survival. Murphy's Diner paid $8 an hour plus tips that rarely broke $20 a shift. The apartment at Pine Ridge Complex cost $850 a month, which meant Sarah worked 6 days a week, often double shifts, leaving Lily with Mrs. Chen alone with strict instructions and a phone number to call in emergencies. Sarah told herself this was temporary, that she'd find that things would improve. But somehow 3 years had passed and nothing had improved at all. December of 2023 arrived with the cruelty of perfect timing. The electric bill hit $287 because the ancient heater ran constantly and the insulation was non-existent. The car needed $450 in repairs to pass inspection, and without a car, Sarah couldn't get to work. She was already 2 months behind on rent, the delay fees stacking up like accusation. Her landlord, Roger Bellamy, had started leaving increasingly aggressive voicemails about the $1,700 she owed his voice, dripping with the particular menace of a man who enjoyed having power over the desperate. Sarah's checking account held $73.42. That was the sum total of her financial stability, the thin barrier between housed and homeless. She'd applied for assistance programs, but the waiting list stretched months, and the requirements felt designed to exclude everyone who actually needed help. Her parents had died in a car accident in 2017, leaving her without family safety net. Her sister had moved to Seattle and stopped returning calls after Sarah asked to borrow money one too many times. The shame of it crushed her some nights when Lily was finally asleep and Sarah could allow herself to feel the full weight of her failure. She'd stand in the dark kitchen, staring at the pile of bills she couldn't pay, the empty cupboards she couldn't fill, the Christmas she couldn't provide, and wonder how much longer she could keep pretending everything would work out. Child Protective Services terrified her more than anything. One wrong move, one complaint from a concerned neighbor or teacher, and they could decide she was unfit. They could take Lily. That fear drove her harder than hunger or exhaustion ever could. She hadn't bought Lily new clothes since September. The coat her daughter wore to school was too small, the sleeves ending above her wrists, the zipper broken and held together with a safety pin. Lily's shoes had a hole near the toe that Sarah had covered with duct tape, hoping none of the other kids would notice. The school lunch account was $45 overdrawn, which meant Lily ate whatever the cafeteria provided to students with negative balances, usually a cheese sandwich and an apple, while other children got hot meals. Sarah skipped meals herself most days, telling Lily she'd eaten at work, watching her daughter carefully to make sure she finished every bite on her plate. Pride was the only thing Sarah had left that felt like it belonged to her. She refused charity, rejected offers of help from well-meaning church ladies, insisted she could handle things herself. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like confirming what she suspected people whispered behind her back, that she was failing, that she couldn't provide, that her daughter deserved better. So she worked herself to exhaustion and told no one how bad things really were, keeping up the performance of competence, even as everything crumbled around her. Jake Harrison had been born in Portland, Oregon in 1981 to parents who should never have had children. His father drank himself mean every night, fists flying at whatever was closest when the rage took over. His mother lasted until Jake was 6 before she walked out without a backward glance, leaving him alone with a man who saw him as both burden and target. The foster care system swallowed Jake when he was 8 after a teacher noticed bruises that couldn't be explained away. 14 years in that system taught Jake that permanence was a lie people told themselves to sleep better at night. He cycled through 5 different homes, each one temporary, each set of foster parents kind enough but never quite kind enough to keep him. Christmas was always the hardest. Other foster kids got picked up by relatives, by biological parents, who'd cleaned up their act by someone who wanted them. Jake spent every Christmas watching through windows as families gathered, feeling the particular agony of being nobody's priority. He dropped out of high school at 16, angry and directionless, and found himself drawn to the edges of legitimate society where other angry young men gathered. A small motorcycle gang gave him something resembling belonging, and for a while that was enough. Petty crimes followed, the kind that felt like rebellion but were really just desperation wearing a leather jacket. His first arrest came at 17 for theft, 6 months in juvenile detention that taught him more about survival than rehabilitation. The turning point arrived in the form of Marcus Williams, a man everyone called chief president of the Hells Angels Oregon chapter. Marcus saw something in 20-year-old Jake beyond the anger and bad decisions, something worth salvaging. He taught Jake about engines, about the difference between brotherhood and gang mentality, about building something instead of just burning it down. Jake earned his patch at 21, worked his way up, learned mechanics and business, and eventually opened Iron Horse Garage in 2007. Now 42, Jake ran a successful business and had the respect of his chapter, but the success felt hollow when he went home alone every night to the apartment above his garage. He tried relationships over the years, but never let anyone close enough to matter. The walls he'd built in childhood had calcified into permanent architecture, keeping everyone at a safe distance where they couldn't hurt him. He told himself he preferred solitude, that connection was overrated, that he'd made peace with being alone. But peace and resignation were different things, and Jake knew which one he was living with. The bar closed at 11:30 on Thursday night, December 21st. Mickey, the bartender, who'd worked for the chapter for 15 years, moved through his closing routine with practiced efficiency, wiping down surfaces and stacking chairs upside down on tables. Jake sat at his usual spot at the end of the bar, nursing his third beer of the night, exhaustion settling into his bones from a long day of rebuilding a transmission on a Harley that should have been junked years ago. The bar itself was exactly what someone would expect from a Hells Angels establishment: dark wood dim lighting, motorcycle memorabilia covering the walls, the smell of beer and motor oil permanently embedded in everything. But it was clean and the drinks were honest, and the trouble that occasionally found its way through the doors got handled quickly and with minimal damage. Jake liked the predictability of it, the routine that required nothing from him emotionally. Mickey hit the button on the old answering machine behind the bar, checking for messages from liquor distributors or members who'd called with questions. The first two messages were standard business. The third message made Mickey pause, his hand hovering over the machine. A child's voice, thin and scared and heartbreakingly small, whispered from the speaker, "Santa didn't come, no presents for me." The message ended with a soft click. Jake's beer bottle stopped halfway to his mouth. His entire body went rigid, muscles locking as the words replayed in his mind. Mickey looked over at him, eyebrows raised in question, but Jake couldn't speak. Something had punched through his chest and squeezed his lungs until breathing required conscious effort. The voice triggered memories Jake had spent decades burying. Christmas morning, 1980, 8 years old in his third foster home, sitting on a donated mattress in a room he shared with two other kids who had somewhere else to be that day. The foster parents had tried, given him a small present wrapped in newspaper, but their real kids got the good gifts, and Jake got the message loud and clear: "You're temporary, you don't matter, nobody's coming for you." He'd sat at the window that morning, watching snow fall, wondering what he'd done wrong to end up so completely alone. The ache of that memory had never fully faded, just gotten buried under years in anger and the determination to never need anyone badly enough to be disappointed again. Now this unknown child's voice had excavated all of it in 3 seconds. His hands shook slightly as he set the beer down. "Play it again." Mickey rewound the message. The small voice filled the bar once more, each word landing like a physical blow. "Santa didn't come. No presents for me." Jake's throat constricted. Behind his eyes, pressure built that might have been tears if he ever let himself cry, but he didn't. Hadn't in 20 years, wouldn't start now. "One more time." The third listening didn't make it easier. Jake's knuckles had gone white where they gripped the bar edge. Every wall he'd built, every defense mechanism that kept him safe and isolated, developed cracks under the weight of that child's sadness. Someone out there in Pine Ridge was experiencing the exact loneliness that had defined his childhood, and this time Jake wasn't powerless. This time he could do something. His voice came out rougher than usual, gravel over broken glass. "Where's the call from?" Mickey checked the caller ID display, squinting at the faded numbers. "Morgan Residence, 47 Maple Street, Pine Ridge Apartments." Jake stood abruptly, the bar stool scraping against the floor. He pulled on his leather jacket with the Hells Angels patch across the back, movements sharp and purposeful. Mickey watched him with the expression of someone who'd seen Jake in various moods over the years, but rarely this particular combination of anger and determination. "You good, brother?" Jake paused at the door, one hand on the frame. "No, but I'm gonna fix it." The cold December air hit him like a slap as he stepped outside, but he barely noticed. His motorcycle sat in the parking lot chrome, catching the light from the single functioning street lamp. He didn't start it yet. He just stood there, breathing hard, trying to calm the storm that had ignited in his chest. He'd spent 42 years trying to forget what it felt like to be that unwanted kid. Now a stranger's daughter had reminded him in 3 seconds, and something fundamental had shifted inside him. He couldn't unhear that voice. Couldn't unknow that somewhere in this town, a child was sitting alone, wondering why nobody cared. And for the first time in decades, Jake felt the walls around his heart develop stress fractures. He pulled out his phone and dialed Chief Marcus Williams. The chapter president answered on the second ring alert despite the late hour. "Stone, what's wrong?" Jake's jaw worked, fighting against vulnerability that felt dangerous even with someone he trusted. "Got a situation. Kid called the bar asking for Santa. Need to talk to the chapter. Soon as possible." Marcus understood immediately that this mattered, that Jake wouldn't ask if it didn't. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. at the garage. I'll get everyone there." The call ended. Jake finally climbed onto his bike, the engine roaring to life, and rode through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge with that child's voice echoing in his head. He didn't go home. He drove past Maple Street instead, slowing as he passed number 47, taking in the rundown building and the dark windows of apartment 3B. A child lived there, someone who'd called for help, someone he was going to help, whether she knew she needed it yet or not. Friday morning arrived with the kind of gray sky that promised snow, but hadn't delivered yet. Jake stood outside Pine Ridge Apartments at 7:45, positioned across the street behind a parked truck, where he could observe without being obvious. The building was 3 stories of peeling paint and sagging gutters, the kind of place landlords purchase cheap and maintain never. A rusted playground sat in what might have once been a courtyard, swings hanging motionless in the cold air. At 7:50, the door to apartment 3B opened and a small figure emerged. The girl couldn't have been more than 5, wearing a coat that was too small and shoes held together with tape. She carried a faded backpack and walked with the careful steps of a child used to navigating the world alone. An elderly Asian woman appeared from the next apartment, checking on her briefly before both waited at the curb. Jake's chest tightened watching her. This was the voice from the phone message. This tiny person standing in the cold breath, visible in small clouds, waiting for a school bus that would take her somewhere warm for a few hours before depositing her back in this place that looked like it could collapse from neglect. The school bus arrived at 8, yellow and loud, and Jake watched the girl climb aboard, taking a seat alone near the front. He waited 30 minutes after the bus left, then approached the apartment manager's office. The man behind the desk was exactly the type Jake expected, middle-aged, overweight eyes that assessed value in everything they landed on. A nameplate identified him as Roger Bellamy. Jake leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, letting his size and leather vest do most of the talking before he opened his mouth. "Got a question about one of your tenants, Sarah Morgan, Unit 3B. Roger's eyes narrowed with suspicion and interest. "You a relative, boyfriend?" Jake ignored the questions. "She current on rent." A slow smile spread across Roger's face, the kind that came from having power over someone else's misery. "That's between me and my tenant. But since you're asking, let's just say Miss Morgan and I have some financial discussions pending." The implication was clear. Sarah was behind, probably significantly, and Roger enjoyed that fact. Jake's hands curled into fists he kept carefully controlled. Violence wouldn't help here much, as he wanted to break this man's teeth. He needed information, not assault charges. "How much does she owe?" Roger leaned back in his chair, assessing whether to answer. 2 months' rent plus late fees. $2,100. Due January 5th or she's out. And between you and me, friend, she ain't coming up with that kind of money. Something cold settled in Jake's stomach. This wasn't just about Christmas presents anymore. This was about a mother and daughter facing eviction in the middle of winter, about a little girl who'd called asking for Santa, not knowing her problems were much bigger than missing toys. The stakes had just escalated from fun to catastrophic. Jake straightened from the doorframe. "She pays by January 5th, you got no grounds to evict." Roger shrugged. "Sure, if she pays, but she won't. And come January 6th, I got a list of people willing to pay market rate for that unit." Winter's a great time to turn over tenants. Desperate people don't negotiate. The casual cruelty of it hit Jake like a physical thing. He wanted to grab this man by his collar and explain exactly what happened to people who preyed on single mothers, but years in the club had taught him that immediate satisfaction often led to long-term problems. Better to fix the situation than to assault the symptom of it. He turned to leave, then paused. You touch her or her kid inappropriately, you even think about it, and there won't be enough of you left to identify. Roger's face went pale. Jake didn't wait for a response. He walked out into the December cold mind, already moving through possibilities. $2,100 wasn't an impossible amount for the chapter to raise. But Roger was right about one thing, even if they covered January. What about February, March? This woman was drowning, and throwing her a rope for 1 month just delayed the inevitable. He spent the afternoon following Sarah's routine from a distance. She left for Murphy's Diner at 5:45, driving a car that coughed black smoke and barely started. Her shift ran until 2, then she picked up Lily from school and drove back to the diner for an evening shift that lasted until closing. Lily sat in a back booth doing homework for those hours, occasionally being brought French fries or a glass of milk by sympathetic waitresses. Around 9, Sarah drove them home, both exhausted, disappearing into that dark apartment where no Christmas waited. Jake's phone buzzed with a message from Chief Marcus. The chapter meeting was set for Friday night at 7 emergency session, called all available members expected to attend. Jake headed to the Iron Horse Bar early, needing to gather his thoughts before he explained why this mattered, why they needed to help a stranger, why one child's phone call had cracked something open in him that he'd kept sealed for 4 decades. 12 members of the Glacier Peak Hells Angels chapter filled the Iron Horse Bar's back room by 7:15 Friday night. The space was cramped boxes of liquor stacked along one wall, a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows. These were men who'd ridden together for years, some for decades, who'd pulled each other out of bad situations more times than anyone counted. Chief Marcus Williams sat at the head of the scarred wooden table, his gray beard and weathered face commanding respect without having to demand it. Jake stood near the door, arms crossed, trying to find words for something he'd never been good at articulating. Tommy Martinez, called Wrench for his mechanical skills, sat to Marcus's right. Bobby Johnson Rev, because he'd been a military chaplain before life took him in different directions, occupied the chair beside Tommy. Danny O'Brien Spark, for his electrical work, leaned against the wall, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. The rest of the chapter filled in around them, waiting to hear why Stone had called an emergency meeting 3 days before Christmas. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd led men through worse situations than this. Stone says we got a situation needs handling. Floor's yours, brother. Jake pushed off from the door, moving into the light. His throat felt tight, words getting stuck behind walls he'd built so long ago he'd forgotten they were there. But that child's voice played again in his mind, and the walls cracked a little wider. Got a phone call at the bar Thursday night. Little girl, maybe 5 years old. She called asking for Santa. Silence around the table. A few exchanged glances, but nobody interrupted. Did some checking. Kid lives at Pine Ridge Apartments with her mother. Father's gone. Mother works doubles at Murphy's trying to make rent. They're 2 months behind, facing eviction January 5th. $2,100 owed. Tommy leaned forward, elbows on the table. What are you proposing? Jake's hands curled and uncurled at his sides. Kid called asking for help. Can't ignore that. Thinking we cover Christmas for her, get some presents, toys, whatever kids her age need. And we cover the rent. Keep them from getting thrown out in January. Rev rubbed his beard, considering. That's generous, brother. But what happens in February when she can't pay again? We gonna subsidize her rent indefinitely. The question Jake had been avoiding since he'd learned the full situation. He didn't have a good answer. All he had was the certainty that doing nothing wasn't an option, that letting this family drown because the solution wasn't perfect would make him the same as every adult who'd failed him as a kid. His voice came out harder than intended. Then we figure out February when February comes. Right now, we make sure that little girl has a Christmas and a home to wake up in. Rest of it we'll handle as it comes. Marcus studied him with eyes that missed nothing. The chapter president had known Jake since he was 20 years old, had seen him angry and broken and slowly rebuilt, had watched him build walls and never quite tear them down. Now something in Jake's face must have told Marcus, This mattered in ways Jake couldn't articulate because he nodded slowly. How much we talk in total resins and rent? Jake had run the numbers in his head a dozen times. 2,100 for rent, figure 500 for presents, clothes, whatever she needs. 2,600 total. Marcus looked around the table at the assembled members. 12 of us here. Comes to just over 200 each. Anyone got a problem with that? The responses came quickly. Tommy pulled out his wallet immediately. Rev nodded. Danny stopped cleaning his nails and sat up straighter. Around the table, hands reached for pockets, heads nodded agreement. In under 2 minutes, the decision was made. $2,600 to help a stranger because one of their brothers asked, because that's what brotherhood meant, because a child had called for help and they could answer. Something loosened in Jake's chest that he hadn't realized was wound so tight. He'd expected support, but hadn't dared hope for this kind of immediate solidarity. Chief Marcus pulled a lockbox from under the table where the chapter kept emergency funds and started counting out bills. We do this anonymous. No names, no expectation of payback. Just Santa's helpers. Tommy leaned back in his chair. When we delivering Christmas Eve, Jake nodded. Late, after the kids asleep. Don't want to spook them. Rev's expression turned serious. Brother, you sure about the mother? If she's proud, she might not accept help. Might see it as charity. Take offense. The concern was valid. Jake had considered it. He remembered Roger's comment about Sarah having discussions with him about rent, the implication that she'd been trying to negotiate, scrambling for solutions. Pride could make people do stupid things, refuse help they desperately needed because accepting it felt like failure. Then we make it clear it's for the kid, not her. Hard to refuse Christmas for your daughter. The planning continued for another hour. Tommy volunteered to coordinate toy shopping, hit the discount stores tomorrow, find age-appropriate gifts. Bobby offered to write a note to include with the cash, something that made clear this was a gift with no strings attached. Danny suggested leaving it all on the porch Christmas Eve around midnight when everyone would be asleep, quick and quiet, so there was no confrontation or awkward conversation. Jake stood listening to his brothers plan an act of kindness for a family they'd never met and felt something shift inside him that he didn't have words for. For so long, his relationship with the chapter had been about loyalty and brotherhood in the abstract. Now it was becoming something more concrete, something purposeful beyond their own survival. They were using their strength to protect instead of intimidate, their resources to build instead of destroy. As the meeting broke up and members filed out into the December night, Chief Marcus pulled Jake aside. The older man's hand landed heavy on his shoulder. This means something to you beyond just helping a kid. It wasn't a question. Jake met his eyes, unable to hide the truth from someone who'd known him half his life. I was that kid. Every Christmas in foster care, watching other kids get picked up by families by someone who wanted them. Nobody ever came for me. Marcus squeezed his shoulder. You're doing right by her brother. More than that, you're doing right by the kid you were. Jake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Marcus released him and headed out, leaving Jake alone in the back room with boxes of liquor and the ghost of a 5-year-old boy who'd grown up into a 42-year-old man, still carrying wounds that hadn't quite healed. Maybe helping this little girl wouldn't fix what was broken in him. Maybe nothing could. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was making sure one more kid didn't grow up feeling like nobody cared whether they existed. Sarah's Friday had started at 5:30 a.m. with the sound of Lily coughing in the next room. The cough was getting worse, probably because their apartment never got warm enough and Lily's coat was too thin for December weather. Sarah had crushed 2 adult Tylenol into powder, mixed it with honey, and convinced Lily to swallow it down. Not ideal, but children's medicine cost money they didn't have, and the cough wasn't bad enough yet to risk an emergency room bill that would bury them completely. Her morning shift at Murphy's crawled past in a blur of refilling coffee and forcing smiles for customers who barely looked at her. The diner smelled like burnt grease and industrial cleaner, the floors sticky despite constant mopping, the booths patched with duct tape that someone had tried to match to the red vinyl. Frank Murphy, the owner, was in his 60s and sympathetic enough, but running a failing business that couldn't afford to pay his employees fairly. Sarah dropped a plate around 11:15, the ceramic shattering on the tile floor, in a crash that made every head turn. Frank appeared from the kitchen, took in the mess, and subtracted $8 from her paycheck for the replacement. She wanted to argue that waitresses shouldn't be charged for accidents, that $8 was half her tips for the morning, that she was already drowning, and he was adding weights. Instead, she swallowed the protest, grabbed the broom, and cleaned up the pieces while customers complained about the wait for their food. Her lunch break found her sitting in the diner's bathroom stall calculator app open on her phone running numbers that wouldn't work no matter how many times she tried. $73 in checking. This week's paycheck would be $287 after taxes minus the $8 for the plate. Electric bill due Monday, $287. That left $73 for everything else: rent, car payment, groceries. Lily's lunch account gassed to get to work. The math was impossible. She'd applied for assistance programs in November, filled out forms that asked intrusive questions about her finances and her life choices, and why she couldn't just manage better. The state programs had 6-month waiting lists. The church programs were already overextended. The food bank gave her pasta and canned vegetables once a month, and she was grateful, but gratitude didn't stretch far enough to cover rent. Roger Bellamy's latest voicemail had included words like legal action and sheriff's notice and January 5th deadline. Sarah knew what came after eviction, a mark on her record that would make renting anywhere else nearly impossible, living in her car, if the car even kept running, losing Lily to Child Protective Services because homeless mothers didn't get to keep their children. The fear of that scenario drove her through shifts when exhaustion made her stumble, kept her from breaking down when the pressure felt unbearable. After her lunch break, Patricia Hendricks settled into Sarah's section. The woman was in her mid-50s, expensively dressed, and made a point of complaining about everything from the coffee temperature to the placement of her silverware. Her breakfast order came with multiple substitutions and special requests that tied up the kitchen. When Sarah delivered the food, Patricia inspected it like she was expecting contamination. "The eggs are too runny. I specifically said over hard." Sarah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll have them remake it right away." Patricia waved her off with a manicured hand. "Don't bother. I'll just eat around them. But really, dear, if you'd pay more attention to your customers instead of looking so miserable all the time, maybe you'd get better tips." The words landed like a slap. Sarah's face burned, but she nodded, collected the barely touched plates, and returned to the kitchen, where she allowed herself 10 seconds to breathe hard against the anger. Patricia left a $2 tip on a $47 check and departed without a backward glance, leaving Sarah to bust the table and wonder how someone could be so casually cruel. Her afternoon shift ended at 2, just in time to pick up Lily from school. The drive across town felt like navigating a minefield, the car, making concerning noises every time she accelerated. Lily climbed in with her too small coat and taped shoes, chattering about art class and a story the teacher had read. Sarah listened with half her attention, the other half calculating whether she could afford a mechanic or if the car would hold out another month. They returned to the diner where Sarah's evening shift started at 3. Lily settled into the back booth with her homework coloring between math problems, occasionally looking up to watch her mother work. Sarah brought her dinner, around 6 French fries and chicken fingers that Frank let her comp without charging. Lily ate carefully, making it last, and Sarah's heart cracked, watching her daughter stretch a simple meal into something special. At 9:45, Sarah's shift finally ended. Her feet ached in cheap shoes that needed replacing. Her back hurt from hours of carrying heavy trays. Her mind felt fuzzy from exhaustion and stress, and the constant calculation of numbers that refused to add up correctly. She counted her evening tips in the car, while Lily dozed in the passenger seat, $23.60. Combined with the morning, she'd made $41 in tips, minus the 8 for the plate. They drove home through streets decorated with lights they couldn't afford, past houses where children slept in warm beds with full stomachs, and Christmas trees, and the certainty that someone would take care of them. Sarah parked in the apartment lot and carried Lily inside, her daughter barely waking as Sarah tucked her into bed, still wearing her school clothes because pajamas needed to last between washes. Standing in the dark kitchen afterward, Sarah pulled out the stack of bills she kept in a drawer. Past due notices in red ink. A letter from Roger Bellamy outlining eviction procedures. A notice from the school about Lily's lunch account. A form letter from the electric company about service disconnection. She spread them across the counter like tarot cards predicting a bleak future, and felt the weight of them pressing down on her chest until breathing took effort. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister in Seattle, a Christmas card in digital form, featuring her sister's perfect family in matching sweaters. The message underneath read, "Hope you are doing well. Miss you." Sarah stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. She couldn't perform wellness for someone who'd stopped helping when help got inconvenient. She sat at the kitchen table until well past midnight, running calculations on paper that never worked, searching online for assistance programs that didn't exist or had already closed applications for the year. When she finally went to bed around 1 a.m., she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Lily's breathing in the next room, and tried not to think about what would happen when January 5th arrived and she still couldn't pay. Failing Lily felt worse than any physical pain she'd ever experienced, and there was no amount of hard work or determination that seemed capable of preventing it. Christmas Eve morning arrived with snow finally deciding to fall, fat flakes drifting down to coat Pine Ridge in white that would have been picturesque if it didn't make everything harder for people already struggling. Jake stood in the Iron Horse garage at 6 a.m., staring at the pile of wrapped presents Tommy had accumulated over the past 2 days. The mechanic had hit every discount store within 30 miles, returning with bags of clothes in size 5T, a thick winter coat with a hood and new shoes that would actually fit a stuffed animal dog, with floppy ears, coloring books, and a set of markers that weren't dried-out books about princesses and talking animals. The gifts sat arranged on his workbench like evidence of something he couldn't quite name. Tommy had wrapped them in paper covered with snowmen and reindeer, the tape applied generously if not skillfully. A large envelope rested on top containing $2,100 in cash, mostly 20s and 50s, pulled from chapter members' wallets in the emergency fund. Bobby had written a note on plain white paper in his careful printing for Lily and her mother. From friends who believe every child deserves Christmas magic. The rent money is not alone. Consider it a gift from Santa's helpers. You are not alone. Jake read the note 3 times, struck by how Bobby had managed to convey both help and dignity in a few sentences. The money was substantial enough to matter, but framed as gift rather than charity, an important distinction for someone with pride. Still, Jake's stomach churned with uncertainty about how Sarah would react. Would she see this as the help it was meant to be, or as interference from strangers who had no business in her life? Chief Marcus arrived at 6:30, Tommy and Rev close behind. They stood around the workbench. These large men in leather jackets surrounding packages meant for a 5-year-old girl, and the contrast wasn't lost on any of them. Danny showed up with coffee and donuts, the bakery box still warm. Nobody spoke much. This wasn't their usual territory, this careful tending to someone else's crisis. They were more accustomed to handling problems with direct action, but gentleness required different skills. Rev picked up one of the wrapped presents, turning it over in his hands. "Kid's gonna lose her mind when she sees this." Tommy nodded, loading gifts into a duffel bag. Assuming the mom lets her keep it, proud people do strange things. Marcus clapped Jake on the shoulder. "You're doing the delivery alone." Jake had considered bringing backup strength in numbers, but ultimately decided this needed to feel less like an invasion and more like magic. A dozen bikers showing up would terrify more than comfort. "Yeah, less intimidating that way. I'll go late around 8. Kids should be asleep by then." The day stretched out long despite the snow and approaching holiday. The garage officially closed at noon on Christmas Eve, sending home the 2 employees who weren't part of the chapter. Jake spent the afternoon pretending to work on a carburetor rebuild while actually watching the clock creep toward evening. His hands moved through familiar motions, but his mind was elsewhere, rehearsing scenarios of how this delivery could unfold, most of them ending badly. Around 4, he drove past the Morgan apartment again. Through the window, he could see Sarah moving around inside Lily, sitting at the kitchen table coloring. No tree visible, no decorations, just a mother and daughter existing in space that felt temporary, like they were camping in their own home, waiting for something better that might never arrive. The scene hollowed out something in Jake's chest, made him think about all the Christmases he'd spent in similar circumstances, hoping things would change, and learning over and over that hope was dangerous when you were powerless. He wasn't powerless anymore. That was the difference. By 7 p.m., snow fell steadily, and Pine Ridge looked like a Christmas card, all the ugliness temporarily covered in white. Jake loaded the duffel bag and envelope into his motorcycle's saddlebags, the leather worn but waterproof. The ride across town was quiet, most people inside with their families. The streets empty except for the occasional car heading home from last-minute shopping. Christmas lights reflected off the fresh snow, red and green and white, creating patterns that would have been beautiful if Jake had been in the mood to appreciate beauty instead of feeling like his nerves were stripped raw. He parked 2 houses down from number 47 at 7:45, killing the engine and sitting in the cold dark gathering courage. Through the Morgan's window, he could see them clearly now. Sarah sat on the couch with Lily tucked against her side, both watching something on TV, Sarah's arm around her daughter, protective and tired. The image of them together, barely making it, but still holding on to each other, made Jake's throat tight. He'd never had that someone who held him like he mattered, someone who fought for him, even when fighting was hopeless. At 8:15, the apartment went dark except for a small lamp in what must be Lily's bedroom. Sarah was putting her daughter to sleep, probably reading a story or singing a song, doing all the things mothers did to make children feel safe, even when safety was an illusion. Jake waited another 30 minutes watching the lamplight finally go out, giving them time to settle. At 8:50, he approached the apartment door with the duffel bag and envelope, his boots crunching in snow that had accumulated 2 inches deep. The porch light was out, probably a burned bulb nobody had money to replace. He set the bag down, carefully placed the envelope on top where it would be visible, arranged everything so it looked intentional rather than abandoned. His hands shook slightly as he worked, adrenaline and emotion mixing into something that made his movements clumsy. He'd just turned to leave when the door opened. Light spilled across the porch and Lily stood in the doorway wearing pajamas with faded cartoon characters, her hair messed from pillow eyes huge, as she took in the presence and the large bearded man standing on her porch. Jake froze, every muscle locking. They stared at each other, this 5-year-old girl and this 42-year-old man, neither moving, both caught in a moment neither had planned for. Lily's voice came out in a whisper that somehow carried in the cold air. "Are you Santa?" Jake's throat closed completely. He'd rehearsed explanations, if caught, prepared deflections and quick exits, but nothing had prepared him for a child looking at him with hope so naked it hurt to witness. Behind Lily, movement caught his attention as Sarah appeared, her face shifting rapidly from confusion to alarm as she took in the scene, her daughter in the doorway, a biker on the porch presents between them. Sarah's hand landed on Lily's shoulder, pulling her back slightly. "Lily, get back inside." But Lily didn't move, just kept staring at Jake with eyes that saw past his leather and tattoos to something she'd been hoping for. Her small voice strengthened. "I called you. I asked Santa to come and you came." Understanding crashed over Sarah's features. The phone call, her 5-year-old daughter calling a biker bar asking for Christmas. Horror and embarrassment flooded her face, followed quickly by defensive anger. She stepped in front of Lily, creating a barrier between her child and this stranger, her voice coming out sharp. "Oh my God, Lily, you called? I'm so sorry, we can't accept." Jake found his voice rough and uncomfortable but functional. "Kid called asking for help. Couldn't say no to that." He gestured toward the presents and envelope, wanting to explain, but not knowing how without making it worse. "These are for you. Merry Christmas." Sarah's eyes landed on the pile of gifts, comprehension dawning about the scale of what was being offered. Her face went from pale to red, emotions warring across her expression, too fast to track. She started to refuse again, words forming about how they couldn't accept charity from strangers, but Lily interrupted with the cutting honesty only children possess. "Wait, thank you, Santa's helper." The little girl darted around her mother's legs before Sarah could stop her, running down the porch steps in bare feet to throw her arms around Jake's leg. The hug hit Jake like a physical impact. Her small arms barely reached around his calf, but the fierceness of her grip suggested she was holding on to more than just a person. She was holding on to hope, onto the belief that someone had heard her and cared enough to answer. Jake looked down at this tiny girl hugging him, at her mother, standing frozen in the doorway with tears streaming down her face, and something that had been locked tight in his chest for 4 decades finally broke open. He crouched down to Lily's level, his large frame folding to make himself less intimidating, bringing his face even with hers. His voice came out softer than he'd known he could make it. "You're welcome, little one. Be good for your mama." Lily nodded seriously, then ran back to Sarah, who caught her and held her close. Sarah's face was a mess of tears and confusion, and something that might have been gratitude if it wasn't tangled up with shame. Her voice shook when she spoke. "I don't understand. Why would you do this? We're strangers. You don't know us." Jake straightened, the height difference between them suddenly pronounced. He struggled to find words for motivations he barely understood himself. Your daughter called asking for help. Sometimes that's enough. He turned to leave, unwilling to push this conversation further to force Sarah into more vulnerability than she'd already shown. But her voice followed him as he walked toward his motorcycle. Who are you? Jake paused, looked back at the mother and daughter framed in the doorway, light snow falling around them like something out of a painting. Just someone who remembers what it's like to be that kid. He started his bike, the engine roar breaking the quiet night, and rode away without looking back. In his rearview mirror, he saw Sarah still standing in the doorway, holding Lily, both of them staring after him. The image burned itself into his memory, two people he'd just tried to help looking lost and grateful and terrified all at once. The ride back to the garage felt longer than the ride there. His hands were steady now, but his insides churned with emotions he had no framework for processing. Relief that he'd delivered the help. Fear that he'd overstepped. Something else. Something warm and painful and unfamiliar that might have been connection if he'd ever let himself feel connected to anything beyond his motorcycle and his chapter. When he got back to the Iron Horse bar, Chief Marcus was waiting with a bottle of whiskey and two glasses. They sat in the back room without speaking for a long time, just drinking and existing in the quiet understanding of men who'd known each other through too many years to need words for everything. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. How'd it go? Jake's response came after several beats, choosing words carefully. Kid saw me, called me Santa's helper, hugged me. Marcus raised his eyebrows, waiting. Mother wasn't sure whether to be grateful or pissed. Think we're landing somewhere in the middle. The chapter president poured another round. Sometimes helping people is messier than fixing motorcycles. Jake laughed without humor. Yeah, give me a broken transmission any day. They drank until midnight, toasting Christmas and lost childhoods, and the strange ways life circles back to give second chances you didn't know you needed. When Jake finally climbed the stairs to his apartment, exhaustion pulled him under almost immediately. He dreamed about a little girl with bare feet in the snow, hugging him like he was something worth holding on to, and woke on Christmas morning feeling fundamentally different in ways he couldn't articulate. Christmas morning in Pine Ridge started with Lily's shriek of joy, loud enough to wake neighbors 3 apartments over. Sarah had barely slept, lying awake most of the night, processing what had happened, trying to make sense of strangers bringing thousands of dollars worth of help for no reason she could understand. When Lily burst from her bedroom at 6:30 and saw the presents, her reaction was everything Sarah had wanted to give her daughter and couldn't. Lily tore through wrapping paper with the enthusiasm only a 5-year-old could muster, pulling out gifts and exclaiming over each one. The winter coat fit perfectly thick and warm with a hood that actually covered her head. The shoes were sturdy, real sneakers with laces and proper soles instead of falling apart from discount store wear. Books and toys and clothes tumbled out of the duffel bag, and Lily arranged them on the floor like treasures, unable to believe they were all hers. Sarah sat on the couch watching, unable to stop crying. Part of her wanted to feel pure gratitude to accept this miracle without question. But another part, the part that had survived 3 years of single parenthood through sheer stubborn refusal to need anyone, felt like she'd been exposed as a failure. Someone had looked at her life and decided she needed rescuing. That burned even as it warmed. The envelope with the cash sat on the coffee table unopened. Sarah stared at it for 20 minutes before finally tearing it open. Her hands shaking, $2,100 in bills carefully counted and bound. The note explained it was rent money, not a loan, a gift from Santa's helpers. The words blurred as Sarah read them 3 times, trying to find the catch, the hidden expectation, the string attached to this generosity. She couldn't find one. It seemed genuine, and that terrified her more than if there had been strings, because genuine kindness from strangers meant her situation was bad enough to inspire pity from people who'd never met her. Lily appeared at her elbow, holding the stuffed dog with floppy ears. Mommy, can we name him? Sarah wiped her eyes, forced brightness into her voice. Of course, baby. What should we call him? Lily thought seriously, then smiled. Rudolph, like Santa's reindeer because Santa's helper brought him. The simple logic of a child's mind making connections adults would never see. Sarah pulled Lily close, breathing in her daughter's shampoo smell, trying to center herself in this moment, instead of spiraling into anxiety about what came next. By 9 a.m., Pine Ridge had begun its Christmas morning routines. Families attended church services at St. Mary's Catholic Church on Main Street. the building filling with people in their holiday best children, squirming in pews and pointing at the nativity scene set up near the altar. Sarah and Lily attended the 10 o'clock mass, Lily wearing her new coat and practically vibrating with excitement, unable to stop talking about Santa's helper and the presents and the miracle of Christmas. Other families noticed. The coat alone would have drawn attention, so obviously new and well-fitting on a child they'd all seen wearing an inadequate jacket for weeks. But it was Lily's joy that really caught people's eyes, her inability to contain the story of the biker who'd brought Christmas to their doorstep. She told anyone who'd listen about calling for help and help arriving about the presents, and the kind man with the beard about how Santa had helpers everywhere who listened when kids needed them. The story spread through the congregation like fire in dry grass. By the time Mass ended, at least 50 people had heard some version of Lily's tale. The reactions varied wildly. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who'd always been kind to Sarah, approached with genuine warmth and hugged her, saying something about Christmas miracles. But Patricia Hendricks, the woman who'd been so cruel at the diner, gathered a small group near the parking lot, and Sarah overheard fragments of their conversation. Patricia's voice carried pitch loud enough to be heard, but not so loud it was obvious she wanted an audience. "Did you hear that biker gang gave the Morgans charity? Can you imagine those people are dangerous criminals? It's completely inappropriate that a child was involved." Another woman someone Sarah recognized from PTA meetings chimed in. "I heard they're drug dealers. Everyone knows the Hells Angels run illegal operations. What kind of mother accepts help from people like that?" Sarah's face burned as she guided Lily toward their car, trying to pretend she hadn't heard. But the damage was done. The whispered judgments followed her, settling into her shoulders like weight she'd never be able to shake. She'd accepted help, and now she was being judged for it, criticized for the very desperation that had made the help necessary. Harold Simmons, a retired banker who served on the town council, stood near his expensive sedan talking to a younger couple. His voice boomed with the authority of someone used to being heard. "Mark my words, those bikers don't do anything without expecting something in return. Nobody gives away thousands of dollars out of the goodness of their heart. They're grooming that family for something." The implication made Sarah feel sick. She strapped Lily into her car seat and drove home with her daughter, chattering happily about church and Christmas and all the people who'd wanted to hear about their presents, completely oblivious to the darker undercurrent of adult suspicion and judgment. Back at the apartment, Sarah made hot chocolate from packets and watched Lily play with her new toys, trying to let her daughter's happiness be enough. But the whispers at church had burrowed under her skin, made her question everything. What did Jake Harrison want? Why had he helped? Was she putting Lily in danger by accepting gifts from someone she didn't know? Someone who ran with a motorcycle club that had a reputation for violence. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos, a teacher at Lily's school who'd always been friendly. The message was brief but kind. "Heard about your Christmas miracle. Don't listen to the gossips. Good people come in all forms. Happy holidays." The text made Sarah cry again, grateful for at least one voice of support amid the judgment. She spent Christmas afternoon trying to process conflicting emotions, while Lily remained blissfully unaware that adults were already turning her Christmas miracle into something ugly. By evening, Sarah had made a decision. She needed to talk to Jake Harrison, needed to understand what he wanted, needed to either accept this help fully or return it and draw a clear boundary. The uncertainty was eating her alive, and she'd spent 3 years learning that uncertainty was more dangerous than hard truths. At least with truth, you knew where you stood. She waited until Lily was asleep, then left her with Mrs. Chen and drove to the Iron Horse Bar. The parking lot was empty except for Jake's motorcycle and one truck. The bar was closed for Christmas, but lights showed in the apartment above the garage. Sarah climbed the external metal stairs, her heart pounding, and knocked before she could lose her nerve. Jake answered after several seconds, surprise clear on his face. He'd removed his leather vest and wore just a plain black t-shirt and jeans, looking somehow younger and more vulnerable without the biker armor. They stared at each other for a long moment before Sarah found her voice. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside without speaking, and Sarah entered his apartment. It was sparse and clean, almost aggressively organized, the space of someone who owned few possessions and kept them precisely arranged. A workbench dominated one corner, covered with motorcycle parts and tools. A small kitchen occupied another corner. A couch and TV, and nothing else except a single photograph on a shelf, a younger Jake, with a group of men in leather vests, all of them laughing at something off camera. Sarah turned to face him, the words spilling out before she could organize them into something coherent. I need to understand. I need to know why you did this. Who does this? Who gives thousands of dollars to strangers? What do you want from us? Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. I don't want anything. Sarah's voice rose despite her intention to stay calm. Everyone wants something. People don't just help for no reason. She pulled the envelope of cash from her purse, held it out to him. I can't accept this. I don't know you. I don't know what you expect in return. And I heard what people are saying at church about your club, being criminals about you expecting favors. Jake cut her off, his voice harder than before. What do you think I want? You think I'm some kind of predator that I helped your kids so I could get something from you? Sarah's hand holding the envelope trembled. I don't know. That's the point. I don't know anything about you except you're in a motorcycle gang and everyone in town says your people are dangerous. His jaw clenched, muscles working beneath his beard. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped low, almost gentle, despite the anger beneath it. I was that kid. The words hung between them. Sarah lowered the envelope, slightly confusion replacing some of the defensive anger. What? Jake moved to the window, staring out at the snowy night, his back to her. His shoulders looked tense enough to snap. I spent 14 years in foster care. Nobody wanted me. Every Christmas, every birthday, every family holiday, I was the kid nobody picked. I know what it feels like to be 5 years old and think you're so worthless that even Santa forgot you exist. His hands gripped the windowsill hard enough to make his knuckles white. Your daughter called my bar asking for help. That little voice on the answering machine, so scared and sad. It broke something in me I didn't know was still capable of breaking. So yeah, I helped. Because I remembered being that kid, and I'll be damned if I let another child feel that way when I have the power to change it. Silence filled the apartment. Sarah felt her defensive walls cracking under the weight of his honesty, of this glimpse into pain that clearly still ran deep despite decades of distance. Her voice came out softer. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Jake turned to face her, and his eyes held more vulnerability than she'd expected from someone who looked so intimidating. You've got nothing to be sorry for. You're a mother protecting her kid. That's what you should do, but Sarah, that money isn't about you owing me anything. It's about making sure that little girl has a home. That's it, nothing more. Sarah looked down at the envelope in her hands, at the cash that represented security for at least one more month, at the help she desperately needed, but couldn't accept without feeling like she'd failed. I can't keep this. I have to figure things out on my own. I've been doing it for 3 years and I'll keep doing it. Jake's response came sharp and immediate. And how's that working out? You're 2 months behind on rent. Your landlord's going to evict you January 5th. Where are you going to go with a 5-year-old in the middle of winter? The brutal honesty hit like a slap. Sarah's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. I'll figure something out. I always do. He moved closer, his size suddenly pronounced in the small space, but his voice stayed gentle. Pride don't keep you warm when you're sleeping in your car. Accepting help isn't the same as failing. It's surviving long enough to fight another day. Sarah shook her head, the tears finally spilling over. You don't understand. I've been on my own since I was 18. I raised Lily by myself after her father walked out. I've never asked anyone for help because asking for help means admitting I can't do it. And if I can't do it, what does that make me as a mother? Jake's expression softened further. It makes you human. It makes you someone dealing with a system designed to keep poor people poor. Taking help when it's offered isn't weakness. It's being smart enough to recognize when you need support. They stood facing each other, Sarah still holding the envelope like it might burn her, Jake radiating a desperate need to make her understand something she couldn't quite grasp. Finally, Sarah's voice emerged small and broken. How do I pay you back? Jake shook his head. You don't. That's the point of a gift. Sarah's legs felt unsteady. She sank onto his couch without asking permission, the envelope falling to her lap. Everything she'd been holding in for months, maybe years, threatened to flood out at once. Her voice cracked. I don't know how to do this. Accept help, I mean. It feels like admitting I've been failing Lily all along. Jake sat in the chair across from her, giving her space. You haven't failed. You've been fighting a battle you were never equipped to win alone. That's not failure, that's just reality being cruel. A knock on the door interrupted them. Jake stood opening it to reveal Roger Bellamy, Sarah's landlord, standing in the hallway. His eyes widened, seeing Sarah there, then narrowed with a smile that made her stomach turn. Roger stepped inside without invitation, his gaze sweeping the apartment before landing on the envelope of cash Sarah still held. Well, well, working things out with your new friends, Sarah, that's good. Real good. He moved closer, eyeing the money. I'll take that rent payment now. But there's been a development. Holiday surcharge, you understand. Total due is now $23.50. Sarah's blood went cold. The notice said $2,100. Roger's smile widened, showing teeth that needed dental work. That was before Christmas. Market rate adjustments for inflation. New total is $23.50 or you're out by the 5th. Take it or leave it. Jake was across the room before Sarah registered him, moving his hand gripping Roger's collar, slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle the shelf with the photograph. Jake's voice came out deadly quiet. The hell did you just say? Roger tried to maintain bravado, but fear flickered in his eyes. This is between me and my tenant. You're assaulting me. I'll call the cops. Jake held him there, barely controlled violence radiating from every line of his body. You're extorting a single mother on Christmas Day, you piece of shit. Tell me why I shouldn't throw you through that window. Roger's face reddened, whether from pressure or anger unclear. Because you'll go to jail and she'll still owe me money. And if she doesn't pay by the 5th plus another $500 for property disturbance because of you, she's out. That's how this works. Jake released him with enough force that Roger stumbled, catching himself against the wall. The landlord straightened his coat with exaggerated dignity, backing toward the door, while pointing at Sarah. $2,850, that's your new total. You've got until January 5th, and your boyfriend here just made it worse for you. He left quickly, footsteps clattering down the metal stairs. Sarah and Jake stood in the sudden silence, both processing what had just happened. The rent amount had gone from $1,700 to $2,100 to $2,850 in the span of one confrontation, climbing because Roger saw an opportunity to squeeze more money from their desperation. Sarah's voice came out hollow. He's going to evict us anyway. Even if I had the money, he'd find another reason. He wants us gone. Jake paced the small apartment, fury making him restless. He can't arbitrarily raise rent like that. It's illegal. Sarah laughed without humor. You think people like him care about legal? He owns half the cheap housing in Pine Ridge. He knows I can't afford a lawyer. He can do whatever he wants. She stood, leaving the envelope on the couch. I need to go. Thank you for trying to help. But this is my problem to solve. Jake grabbed her arm gently as she moved toward the door, not restraining but stopping her. Wait, there might be another way. Sarah's first day at Iron Horse Garage started on Monday, January 1st, the new year arriving, with temperatures cold enough to make breathing hurt. She'd spent the previous week in a state of disbelief after Jake offered her a bookkeeping position at $18 an hour, 30 hours, weekly flexible schedule around Lily's school. The math worked out to over $2,000 a month, more than she'd made in 6 weeks at the diner. Frank Murphy had been understanding when she gave notice, almost relieved since business was slow enough. He'd been considering cutting staff anyway. Now she stood in the garage office at 8 a.m., Lily beside her clutching Rudolph the stuffed dog, both of them nervous about this new arrangement. The office sat above the main garage floor, accessed by metal stairs, windows overlooking the work bays, where Tommy and Danny were already starting on the day's repairs. The space smelled like motor oil and coffee-organized chaos, with filing cabinets and a desk holding an ancient computer that hummed when powered on. Jake appeared in the doorway holding 2 mugs, steam rising in the cold air. Coffee for you, hot chocolate for the kiddo. Lily's face lit up as she accepted the mug carefully, both small hands wrapped around the warmth. Sarah took hers with a quiet thank you, still adjusting to this dynamic, where the intimidating biker who'd rescued them now functioned as her employer. The shift in their relationship felt fragile, like they were both learning new roles without a script. He spent the morning walking her through the bookkeeping system, surprisingly patient, as he explained invoice tracking and parts ordering and payroll processing. Sarah caught on quickly, her mind organizing information, naturally finding patterns in the chaos of receipts and work orders. Jake watched her work for a moment, something approving in his expression, before heading down to help with the transmission rebuild. Lily settled into a corner. Sarah had prepared a beanbag chair and small table with coloring books. But she didn't stay there long. Within an hour, she'd wandered down to the garage floor, drawn by curiosity about the motorcycles and the men working on them. Sarah tensed, ready to call her back, but Tommy looked up from his work and smiled. His voice carried up to the office, gentle in a way that didn't match his appearance. "Hey there, little miss. Want to learn about motorcycles?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. Tommy grabbed a rag, wiped his hands, and launched into an explanation about engines and pistons and how combustion worked, simplifying concepts for a 5-year-old while treating her questions seriously. Sarah watched from the window, seeing her daughter animated in ways she rarely was at home, asking questions without fear, touching tools Tommy handed her with reverent care. Danny joined them, showing Lily how to use a wrench, his hands guiding hers as she tightened a bolt that didn't need tightening, but gave her the experience of contributing. These large tattooed men who Pine Ridge whispered were dangerous criminals were teaching her daughter with more patience than some teachers had shown, and Sarah felt something shift in her understanding of people and reputations and the gap between appearance and reality. Lunch arrived via pizza delivery, Jake ordering enough for everyone without asking if Sarah wanted to chip in. They ate in the office, Lily chattering about everything she'd learned, words tumbling over each other in excitement. Jake listened with half his attention on a work order, occasionally nodding or asking questions that showed he was tracking her monologue despite appearing distracted. Sarah watched him interact with Lily, noting the careful way he modulated his voice around her daughter, how he never talked down to her, but adjusted his vocabulary to her level. This wasn't someone practiced in dealing with children. This was someone trying hard and succeeding through sheer determination to get it right. The afternoon passed quickly. Sarah processed invoices and updated customer files, finding satisfaction in organizing chaos into systems that made sense. Her first paycheck wouldn't come for 2 weeks, but knowing it was coming, knowing she had steady income at a wage that might actually cover expenses, loosened something in her chest that had been clenched tight for years. At 3 p.m., she collected Lily and drove to pick up a few groceries, the first time in months she'd shopped without calculating every item's cost against her remaining balance. She still shopped carefully, old habits too ingrained to break immediately, but the panic was gone. The certainty that one unexpected expense would destroy everything had been replaced with something resembling stability. Fragile, but real. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a stack of bills and her phone calculator. For the first time in 3 years, the numbers actually worked. Rent with Jake's help covered, electric bill manageable, car payment possible, groceries budgeted. The revelation that she might survive, that Lily might grow up in an apartment instead of a shelter, hit Sarah with enough force that she started crying in relief, finally finding an outlet after months of being suppressed beneath survival mode. She'd spent so long believing she had to do everything alone that accepting help felt like betraying some fundamental principle. But Jake's words from Christmas night echoed in her mind. Accepting help isn't the same as failing. It's surviving long enough to fight another day. Maybe he was right. Maybe strength wasn't refusing help, but being brave enough to accept it when offered. The first 3 weeks of January established patterns that began feeling like normal life instead of crisis management. Sarah worked mornings while Lily was at school, picked her up at 3, brought her back to the garage for the afternoon. Lily did homework at the small table in the office, occasionally wandering down to watch the mechanics work, asking questions that made the men laugh or think or both. Jake taught her about tools, the names and functions of wrenches and sockets and screwdrivers. Tommy showed her engine components, letting her hold spark plugs and gaskets while explaining what they did. Danny let her help organize the parts shelves, teaching her to read labels and match numbers. She was learning more about mechanics at 5 years old than most adults knew, absorbing information like only children can when something captures their interest. Sarah watched these interactions through the office window, still processing the strangeness of her daughter being raised partially by Hell's Angels. But Lily thrived in ways that made Sarah's concerns feel small. Her daughter laughed more, spoke more confidently, carried herself with less of the defeated posture poverty had been teaching her. The garage had become something safe, a place where people were kind and expectations were clear, and nobody judged her for needing help. Jake remained careful around Sarah, maintaining professional distance that felt deliberate. He didn't crowd her space or make inappropriate comments or expect anything beyond the work she provided. But Sarah noticed things anyway, how he always made sure she and Lily ate lunch, how he'd fixed her car's check engine light without charging labor, how he positioned himself between them and customers who got aggressive, a silent protection she'd never had before. Something was growing between them that neither acknowledged awareness, humming beneath every interaction. Sarah would look up from invoices to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. He'd reach past her to grab something from a shelf, and the proximity would make her breath catch. Small moments that meant nothing individually, but accumulated into something undeniable. The second week of February brought Mrs. Henderson's parent-teacher conference. Sarah sat across from Lily's teacher in the small classroom after hours preparing for bad news, because good news never required conferences. But Mrs. Henderson smiled warmly as she opened Lily's file. Her voice carried genuine pleasure. "I wanted to tell you that Lily's doing remarkably better. She's more engaged in class, participating in discussions, making friends. Her reading level has jumped 2 grades in the past month." Sarah blinked, processing. Better, she was struggling. Mrs. Henderson's smile faltered slightly. "Well, yes, before Christmas, Lily was withdrawn, often seemed tired, had trouble focusing. I was concerned about her home situation, but hesitated to contact CPS without more evidence of neglect." The casual mention of CPS made Sarah's stomach drop despite the positive context. Mrs. Henderson continued, oblivious to Sarah's reaction. "But whatever changed in your circumstances, it's working. She's a different child now. Keep doing what you're doing." Sarah left the conference feeling the complicated mix of pride and shame that defined her relationship with success. Lily was thriving, which was everything Sarah wanted, but only because strangers had intervened when Sarah couldn't provide what her daughter needed. The wound to her pride still ached, even as she celebrated Lily's progress. At church the following Sunday, Father Thomas O'Brien pulled Sarah aside after Mass. The elderly priest's kind face held something serious as he guided her to a quiet corner of the parish hall. His voice dropped low, concern evident. "Sarah, I've been hearing things around town. Some of the more vocal parishioners are expressing concern about your association with the Hells Angels. I wanted you to know there's talk of organizing opposition." Sarah's heart sank. "Opposition to what?" Father Thomas sighed. "Harold Simmons and Patricia Hendricks are forming what they're calling the Pine Ridge Family Values Coalition. Their stated goal is protecting the town from dangerous elements, but really they're targeting the Iron Horse Garage specifically. There's talk of business license challenges, zoning complaints, anything to make trouble." He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "I'm telling you because these people can be vicious when they decide someone doesn't belong. And they're using your situation, suggesting that you've been somehow corrupted or coerced. It's nonsense, but gossip spreads faster than truth." Sarah felt heat rise to her face, anger mixing with humiliation. "What am I supposed to do?" Father Thomas's expression hardened in a way Sarah had never seen from him. "Stand your ground. Jake Harrison and his chapter helped you when the rest of us failed. That's the truth. Don't let small-minded people make you ashamed of accepting kindness." The priest's support meant more than Sarah could articulate. She thanked him and collected Lily, but the warning sat heavy in her mind as they drove home. The town was dividing over her, judging her choices, and she'd become a symbol in an argument she'd never asked to be part of. Tuesday evening, February 14th, arrived with temperatures dropping below zero. Sarah worked late, finishing month-end reports, while Jake handled a rush repair on a bike needed for the next morning. Lily had fallen asleep on the office couch around 7, wrapped in a blanket Jake kept specifically for that purpose. Sarah checked on her periodically while working, each time feeling gratitude that her daughter could sleep safely while she worked instead of being left alone in their apartment. Around 8:30, Sarah's phone rang. Mrs. Chen's number. Anxiety spiked immediately because the elderly woman never called this late unless something was wrong. Miss Chen's voice came through, shaking and coughing. "Sarah, I'm so sorry to bother, but there's smoke. Fire alarm going off. I got out, but I think it's bad." Sarah's blood went cold. "Where? What's on fire?" Mrs. Chen's response came between coughs. "The building, our building, started in the maintenance closet near your apartment. Fire department's coming, but Sarah, it's spreading fast. Sarah dropped the phone, her legs barely holding her as reality crashed over her. Their apartment was burning. Everything they owned, the few possessions that made their space home, was being consumed by fire. She stumbled down the stairs toward Jake's work bay, words catching in her throat. He looked up from the motorcycle, immediately seeing her face already moving toward her. What happened? Sarah's voice came out thin and high. Fire? The apartment building. Mrs. Chen called. Everything's burning. Jake didn't hesitate. He shut off the work light, grabbed his keys, called up to where Danny was working in another bay. Watch Lily. Sarah and I gotta go. Emergency. They took Jake's truck, the motorcycle impractical for this situation, driving too fast through dark streets toward Pine Ridge Apartments, where orange light already glowed against the night sky. Fire trucks blocked the road 2 blocks away, forcing them to park and run the rest of the distance. The scene that greeted them looked apocalyptic. Flames consumed the entire east wing of the building, the side that held Sarah's apartment. Fire crews worked with hoses, but the blaze was too advanced, too hot, spreading faster than they could contain. Residents stood in clusters wrapped in blankets provided by Red Cross volunteers who'd arrived quickly. Children cried. Adults stood in shocked silence, watching their homes burn. Mrs. Chen sat in an ambulance getting oxygen, her face sooty, but otherwise appearing unharmed. Sarah ran toward the fire marshal, a stern-faced man named Captain Torres, who was coordinating the response. My apartment 3B, I need to get inside. My daughter's things. Torres caught her shoulders firmly, but not roughly. Ma'am, you can't go in there, the structure's compromised. East wing's completely engulfed. I'm sorry, but anything in that section is gone. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Gone. Everything gone. Lily's new toys from Christmas, the stuffed dog, she loved the winter coat that actually fit the few photographs Sarah had managed to save from her marriage, her mother's necklace gone. All of it consumed by flames that turned 3 years of careful survival into ash in less than an hour. Jake's hand landed on her shoulder, steady and grounding. She turned into him without thinking, pressing her face against his chest, and his arms came around her, immediately holding her while she shook. Around them, families wept and firefighters shouted and the flames roared, but Sarah heard nothing except the sound of everything she'd fought to build collapsing. Captain Torres spent the next hour investigating, his team moving through the scene with practiced efficiency once the fire was controlled enough to allow entry. Sarah and Jake waited with the other displaced residents, both wrapped in shock blankets, despite not having been inside during the fire. When Torres finally approached them, his expression was grim. His voice carried the weight of bad news delivered too many times. Fire started in the maintenance closet using accelerant. This was arson, deliberate and planned. Sarah's breath stopped. Someone set this fire on purpose. Torres nodded. We found evidence of gasoline. Building security footage shows a vehicle in the parking lot around the time the fire started. We're working with police to identify the driver. Jake's arm around Sarah tightened, his other hand curling into a fist. His voice came out carefully controlled. What kind of vehicle? Torres checked his notes. White pickup truck. Can't see the plates clearly, but we're working on it. Jake's entire body went rigid. Sarah felt it, the sudden tension that radiated violence barely contained. She looked up at him, saw murder in his eyes, and understood he'd made a connection she hadn't. What? Jake, what is it? His voice came through clenched teeth. Roger Bellamy drives a white pickup. The implications settled over them like ice water. Roger, who'd been threatening eviction, who'd tried to extort more money, who'd been furious after Jake grabbed him, had potentially burned down the building rather than wait for legal eviction. 20 families displaced, children, traumatized possessions, destroyed, all because one man couldn't handle losing control over his tenants. Captain Torres was already on his radio calling the information to someone at the police station. Within 30 minutes, officers arrived to take statements. Roger was arrested at his home before midnight, his truck reeking of gasoline, a partially empty gas can in the truck bed. The evidence was overwhelming. He'd committed arson to cover the illegal rent increases, thinking insurance would pay, and he could rebuild while charging higher rents. But Sarah barely registered the justice of Roger's arrest. She was too focused on the immediate crisis. She and Lily had nowhere to go. The Red Cross shelter was setting up cots at the community center for displaced residents, but the idea of taking Lily there, of sleeping in a room full of strangers with no privacy or stability, made Sarah want to scream. Jake's voice cut through her spiraling panic. You're staying with me. Sarah started to protest to insist they couldn't impose, but he cut her off. Not up for debate. I've got a spare bedroom. Lily needs stability. Come on. Too exhausted to argue, Sarah let him guide her back to the truck. They collected Lily from the garage, Danny having kept her entertained with stories, and not mentioning the emergency, just saying Mommy was helping with something important. Lily barely woke as Jake carried her to his apartment, above the garage, her head resting on his shoulder with the trust only children have for people who've proven themselves safe. Jake settled Lily into his bedroom, the only proper bed in the apartment, while he'd take the couch. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching him tuck blankets around her sleeping daughter with surprising gentleness for someone his size. When he straightened, they were suddenly close in the small space, both exhausted and overwhelmed, and held together by threads that felt ready to snap. Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. I don't know how to keep accepting help from you. Jake's response was equally quiet. Then stop thinking of it as accepting help and start thinking of it as family, taking care of family. The word family hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to fully examine. Sarah felt tears threatening again, the third or fourth breakdown of the night, and Jake seemed to understand. He guided her out of the bedroom, gave her clean towels and one of his t-shirts to sleep in, showed her where everything was with minimal words, because words felt too heavy right now. Sarah lay on the couch long after Jake had retreated to the spare room, staring at the ceiling, processing the fact that her entire life had just been reset to zero again. No apartment, no possessions, no stability. Just her daughter sleeping in a stranger's bed and the knowledge that tomorrow she'd have to figure out how to rebuild from ashes. But Jake's words echoed family taking care of family. And despite everything, despite the fear and exhaustion and uncertainty, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. The news of the fire spread through Pine Ridge faster than the flames had spread through the building. By dawn Wednesday, the story had evolved through the gossip machine. 20 families displaced, arson. Confirmed landlord arrested, Hell's Angels involved somehow. The last part was technically true since Sarah worked for Jake, but the whispers twisted it into something darker, suggesting the bikers had connections to the fire, that this was retaliation for something that respectable people needed to be concerned. Harold Simmons convened an emergency town council meeting for Thursday evening. The official topic was public safety and housing crisis response. But everyone knew the real agenda, using the fire as ammunition against the Iron Horse garage. Sarah heard about the meeting from Maria Santos, who called Wednesday afternoon with a warning. Maria's voice carried a frustration. Harold's trying to paint this as evidence that the biker club is dangerous for Pine Ridge, He's completely ignoring that Roger Bellamy was arrested, that the Hells Angels had nothing to do with the fire. He's just using this tragedy as an excuse to go after people he doesn't like. Sarah felt anger rising beneath her exhaustion. What am I supposed to do? Maria's response came firm. Show up, tell the truth, don't let them control the narrative. Thursday evening arrived too quickly. Sarah dressed carefully in clothes borrowed from Maria, since everything she owned had burned trying to look respectable and failing because trauma wore too openly on her face. Jake picked her up at 6:30, Chief Marcus and several other chapter members meeting them at Town Hall. The building was packed, over 200 people crammed into a space meant for half that standing room only along the back wall. Harold Simmons sat at the council table looking smug, Patricia Hendricks beside him, both of them radiating the certainty of people who'd never faced real consequences. Sarah found a seat near the front, Jake standing behind her with his brothers, their presence drawing stares and whispers. The room divided along invisible lines, those who supported the bikers on one side, those who wanted them gone on the other, with a large, uncertain middle ground, waiting to be convinced either way. Harold called the meeting to order, to his voice carrying the pompous authority of someone who enjoyed power. We're here to discuss recent events and their implications for Pine Ridge's safety and values. The fire at Pine Ridge Apartments displaced 20 families and put children at risk. While Roger Bellamy has been arrested, we must examine the broader context. He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in. We have in our town a motorcycle gang with documented criminal associations. Their presence has been connected to various incidents, including this tragedy. I'm proposing a new ordinance restricting business licenses for establishments with criminal affiliations. The words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable while targeting the Iron Horse garage specifically. Jake's hands gripped the back of Sarah's chair hard enough that she felt the tension through the metal. Chief Marcus stood his voice cutting through the murmurs. Point of order. What criminal affiliations? Show me one arrest, one charge, one piece of evidence that our chapter has broken any law. Harold smiled condescendingly. The Hells Angels are a known criminal organization. That's well documented. Marcus's response came sharp. Show documentation specific to our chapter. You can't because there isn't any. We're a legal motorcycle club. We pay taxes, employ people, follow every regulation. You're proposing discrimination based on prejudice, not facts. The argument escalated, voices rising around the room. Sarah sat frozen, watching adults argue about whether the people who'd saved her deserved to exist in this town. The absurdity of it, the cruelty, the casual willingness to destroy good people's lives because they look threatening, made her sick. Patricia Hendricks stood, her voice dripping false concern. We must think of the children. Is it appropriate for young people to be exposed to this lifestyle? I've heard that Sarah Morgan's daughter spends significant time at the garage. Is that safe? Should child services investigate? The direct attack on Sarah and Lily snapped something inside her. She stood before she'd consciously decided to speak, her voice shaking with fury. You want to talk about protecting children? Where were you when I was working 16-hour days trying to feed my daughter? Where were you when her school lunch account was negative and she was eating cheese sandwiches while other kids got hot meals? Where were you when we were about to be evicted and freeze on the streets? Her voice grew stronger, anger burning through fear. Jake Harrison and his club helped us when nobody else did. They gave my daughter Christmas when I couldn't. They gave me a job that pays enough to survive. They gave us a place to stay when our home burned down. You want to judge them for how they look, for what you assume about them based on prejudice, but I've seen who they really are, and they're better people than most of you. The room erupted in applause from some corners, shocked silence from others. Sarah remained standing, breathing hard, feeling exposed but also somehow lighter. She'd spoken truth loudly, and nobody could take that back. Lily's voice suddenly cut through the noise, clear and high. Mr. Stone is nice. He reads me stories. He's teaching me about motorcycles. He's like a daddy. Sarah turned to see her daughter standing in the doorway, Mrs. Chen behind her, apologetic, having brought Lily because Sarah couldn't find childcare. The simplicity of Lily's statement, the absolute certainty in her 5-year-old voice silenced even Harold Simmons. Father Thomas stood from his seat, moving to the council table. I've been quiet long enough. This council was ready to let families suffer because helping them wasn't convenient. The Hells Angels stepped up when our churches and charities fell short. And now we want to punish them for it. What does that say about us? Maria Santos joined him. I teach at the school. I see dozens of struggling families every day. How many of us have given thousands of dollars to help them? How many have offered jobs, housing, real support? We're quick to judge, but slow to act, and that makes us hypocrites. The tide was turning slowly but visibly. The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Harold's confidence cracked around the edges. Patricia looked around the room, seeing support that wasn't there. The uncertain middle ground was shifting toward the bikers, swayed by Sarah's testimony and Lily's innocence and Father Thomas's moral authority. The vote happened at 9 p.m. after 2 more hours of debate. 5 council members, same composition as before, Harold and Patricia against Father Thomas for Richard Lee and Susan Park, uncertain. Susan stood, her voice steady. I've been thinking about what kind of community we want to be. Do we want to punish people for helping? Do we want to teach our children that appearances matter more than actions, because that's what this ordinance does? She looked at Jake and Sarah. I vote to deny this ordinance. Iron Horse Garage stays. Richard Lee echoed her. I second. Motion denied. The room erupted in applause and protest simultaneously. Harold and Patricia stormed out, their coalition fracturing before it had fully formed. But the majority had spoken, and the bikers were staying. Jake's hand landed on Sarah's shoulder, heavy and warm, and when she looked up at him, his eyes held something that made her breath catch. They left town hall together, Lily between them holding both their hands, and Sarah realized this small family unit they'd accidentally formed felt more real than anything she'd had in years. Something had shifted tonight beyond the town's acceptance. Something personal and terrifying and inevitable. Back at Jake's apartment after putting Lily to bed, They stood in the small kitchen with coffee. Neither was drinking the air thick with unspoken things that could no longer be ignored. Sarah finally found words. Thank you. For everything. For more than I can list. Jake set down his mug, his full attention on her. You don't have to keep thanking me. Sarah stepped closer, her voice dropping. When you look at us, at me and Lily, what do you see? Jake's throat worked, choosing words carefully. I see home. I see the family I never thought I'd have. I see what I want my life to look like. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Sarah closed the remaining distance, her hand finding his. I see the same thing. It terrifies me, but I see it too. Jake's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. I know it's complicated. You work for me. We're living together out of necessity. The timing's terrible. But Sarah, these past 2 months with you and Lily, it's been the best part of my entire life. Sarah felt tears threatening for better reasons than before. I'm scared. My judgment has been so bad before. What if he cut her off gently? We'll go slow, for Lily's sake. We won't rush anything. But we don't have to pretend this isn't happening either. Sarah nodded, then made a decision that felt both reckless and right. She kissed him, tentative at first, then deeper when he responded. His arms came around her, and she felt safe in ways she'd stopped believing were possible. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Jake's voice came rough with emotion. So we're doing this, Sarah managed a smile despite the tears. Slowly, but yes. Spring arrived in Pine Ridge with the kind of hope that only comes after surviving winter. Sarah and Lily moved into a new apartment in April, a better building with a landlord who wasn't a criminal, rent manageable with her iron horse salary. But they spent most evenings at Jake's place. Anyway, the three of them falling into patterns that felt like family dinners together, homework, help bedtime stories Jake read with surprising enthusiasm. Lily thrived in ways that astonished Sarah daily. Her daughter's confidence had blossomed. Her vocabulary expanded from hanging around the garage, her drawings filled with motorcycles and tools, and the men who'd become uncles without anyone formally bestowing the title. She started calling Jake Dad sometime in May, casual and natural, like she'd always meant to, and Jake didn't correct her, just pulled her close and held her like she was precious. The relationship between Sarah and Jake developed slowly, carefully, both of them cautious about disrupting what they were building. They didn't live together officially yet, didn't rush physical intimacy beyond kissing, focused on creating foundation before attempting structure. But by June, everyone who knew them understood they were together, that this mismatched pair had somehow found exactly what each needed in the other. The town's attitude had shifted too. The Iron Horse Garage saw business increase as people who'd been skeptical gave them a chance and discovered quality work at fair prices. The guardian presence at the garage became known, word spreading that struggling families could find help there without judgment. Tommy started a free motorcycle maintenance class for teenagers, teaching skills that translated to employment. The chapter became part of Pine Ridge's fabric instead of something separate and threatening. Christmas Eve 2024 found Sarah and Lily at the Iron Horse Bar, helping decorate for the chapter's annual party. Lights strung across the ceiling, tables laden with food brought by members and friends, the space transformed from rough biker bar into something warm and welcoming. Lily wore a red dress Sarah had bought without checking price tags first, her hair in braids running between adults with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved. Jake found Sarah in the office during a quiet moment, closing the door behind him. He looked nervous, which was unusual enough to make Sarah's heart speed up. What's wrong? Jake pulled a small box from his pocket, and Sarah's breath stopped. He held up his hand quickly. Before you panic, it's not what you think. Not yet, anyway. He opened the box to reveal a key on a chain. Key to my apartment. Thought maybe you and Lily might want to move in officially. Make it a real home instead of this complicated situation where you're there half the time anyway. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the good kind that came from overwhelming happiness instead of despair. Jake Harrison, are you asking me to move in with you? His slight smile appeared, the one he saved for her and Lily. I am, no pressure. Take your time thinking about it, but I'm ready whenever you are. Sarah didn't need time. She'd spent the past year learning to trust again, to accept help, to believe that good people existed and that she deserved happiness. This man who'd started as a stranger answering a desperate child's phone call had become the center of her world, and she was done pretending otherwise. Yes, absolutely yes. Jake pulled her close, kissing her with the kind of passion they usually kept controlled around Lily, both of them grinning against each other's mouths. When they finally separated, Sarah felt lighter than she'd ever been, unburdened by fear that this would be taken away. Lily burst through the door without knocking, saw them together, and made an exaggerated gagging sound. You kissing, but also... She paused dramatically. Are we going to live with Dad forever now? The casual use of Dad still made Jake's eyes go soft. He crouched down to Lily's level. Would you like that? Lily threw herself at him, small arms wrapping around his neck. Yes, then we'll be a real family. Jake caught Sarah's eyes over their daughter's head, something profound passing between them. They had always been a real family from the moment he had chosen to help and she'd chosen to accept it. But now they were making it official, choosing each other deliberately instead of through crisis. The party continued downstairs, voices and laughter rising up through the floorboards. Sarah took Jake's hand, Lily took his other one, and they descended the stairs together. The Hells Angels chapter erupted in cheers, seeing them understanding without explanation that something had been decided. Chief Marcus raised his beer in salute. Tommy whistled. Rev called out blessings. Sarah looked around at these people who'd become family, at her daughter glowing with happiness, at Jake beside her, solid and steady, and somehow hers. 1 year ago, she'd been drowning, certain she'd lost before the fight had really begun. Now she stood in a room full of people who cared, doing work that mattered, living a life that felt possible instead of impossible. Lily pulled them both onto the makeshift dance floor, where someone had queued up Christmas music. They swayed together, the three of them, while snow fell outside the windows, and the bar filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the heater running overtime. This was what healing looked like, messy and slow, and requiring help from unexpected places. Later, after the party wound down and Lily had fallen asleep in the office, Sarah and Jake stood at the garage door watching snow-coat Pine Ridge in fresh white. His arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close against the cold. You know what I realized? Sarah looked up at him. What? Jake's voice held wonder. A year ago, I was alone, angry, empty, convinced I didn't deserve connection because everyone I'd ever needed had abandoned me. Then a little girl called, asking for Santa. He paused, emotion making his voice rough. She gave me purpose. You gave me love. This town taught me that family isn't just blood or patches or brotherhood. It's the people who show up when things get hard and stay after things get better. It's choosing each other every day. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were the kind worth shedding. She turned into his embrace, wrapping her arms around his waist, holding this man who'd saved her family and let them save him in return. We're not going anywhere, she whispered against his chest. You're stuck with us. His arms tightened around her. Good, that's exactly what I want. Behind them, through the office window, Lily slept peacefully, surrounded by people who'd fight the world to keep her safe. Above them, stars emerged between clouds, cold and distant, but somehow perfect. And around them, Pine Ridge settled into Christmas peace, a town that had learned the hard way that sometimes the people who look most dangerous are the ones who show up when everyone else has stopped looking. Morning would bring new challenges because life never stopped being complicated. But tonight, standing in the garage doorway, with snow falling and Lily safe and Sarah in his arms, Jake Harrison understood what he'd been searching for his entire life. Home wasn't a place. It was the people who chose to stand beside you in the darkness, who held your hand through the fire, who believed you were worth fighting for, even when you'd stopped believing it yourself. A year ago, a scared little girl had called asking for Santa. Today, she had a father who would move mountains to keep her safe, a mother who'd learned that accepting help wasn't weakness, and a family built not on blood, but on choice and courage, and the stubborn refusal to let each other face the world alone. That was the real Christmas miracle, not the presents or the money or the dramatic rescue. It was three broken people finding each other and discovering that together they weren't broken anymore. They were home.